Okay, so we're on page 97 in the company of devotees. And our beloved Thakur is talking to, a group of folks. And he just got finished saying, in God's creation, there are all sorts of things. He has created bad men as well as good men. It is He who gives us good tendencies. It is He again who gives us evil tendencies. And the neighbor says something very, very matter of fact. He says, in that case, we're not responsible for our sinful actions, are we? Which, it's a good try, and Ramakrishna says sin begets its own result, which means, okay, you can say that, but if you know that, you won't suffer for your actions. If you don't know that, you will still assume responsibility and suffer for those actions. And so he goes on to elucidate this a bit more here for us. But it's important to know, that there are these truths that how do you make that distinction? If you read that book, A Stranger in a Strange Land, he created a new word called grok. And the word, because he says that we didn't have a proper word in English, grok means like, Ramakrishna talks about a little bit, some know milk, you can study milk, but until you've actually tasted it, you don't know milk, right? You can give lectures on it, you can do whatever you want, but if you haven't tasted it, you don't know it. And so Ramakrishna is talking to that here. He's saying that these truths, yes, you can intellectually know all of these things. Advaita Vedanta, it's very easy to get good at speaking about Advaita, about being able to rattle off all of that uh, knowledge, all of those facts, and it's lots of fun to do that. But do you know it? Do you know it? And like, I mentioned Vivekananda when he had his Advaitic experience with Thakur. For several weeks afterwards, he was doing things like having to bang his head against the railing to make sure that it was real. That he would sit there and he wouldn't be able to eat his food because he just couldn't see there was no point in eating the food. The food and him were one. So, there's those levels, those gradations of knowing versus just understanding or having an intellectual knowledge. And so he speaks to that here. He said, sin begets its own result. This is God's law. Won't you burn your tongue if you chew a chili? In his youth, Mathur led a rather fast life, so he suffered from various diseases before his death. One may not realize this in youth. I have looked into the hearth in the kitchen of the Kali temple when the logs are being burnt. At first, the wet wood burns rather well. It doesn't seem then that it contains much moisture. But when the wood is sufficiently burnt, all the moisture runs back out of one end, and at last the water squirts from the fuel and puts out the fire. So, see what he's saying there? Do you understand what he's saying? It's like you can live your fast life and it may not catch up with you. You may think, oh, I'm getting away with it. My body's healthy. I feel great. I look great. I am great. Whatever, whatever comes to your mind. But he says eventually it's going to catch up to you. At first it may seem like that green wood is burning just fine, but eventually that water shows itself, sprays and puts out the fire. And so this, if we think we're getting away with our compromises in our spiritual life, this is the warning for us. In that day, in that old age, when we really come to rely on our spiritual practice, if we haven't done the yamas and niyamas, if we haven't done the discipline and the self-control and all of those things, eventually it'll come up and you just won't be able to concentrate your mind. You won't be able to touch that stillness inside. You won't be able to find that shrine of the unchanging that's within you. Uh, because sin begets its own reward, meaning it blocks you from advancing if these things are not dealt with. And so it's only ourself that we're hurting in our subtle compromises in our spiritual practice, whether it's not doing our practice or skipping practices or not doing them very sincerely or not working very hard at them and skipping our readings, whatnot. We're taking it easy. And it may seem like it's not such a big deal, no problem. And that's because really it's not hurting anyone else. It's you, that can't experience this divine ecstasy. It's you that can't experience this divine knowing that the beloved is near, is with, and that this universe is in fact a universe of love, and that is in fact an illusion of mind. You can't see that if you're still attached to the workings of the body and the workings of the mind. If you haven't surrendered your ego, your very sense of self, you can't fully enjoy the beloved. One of my favorite sayings is infinite grace requires infinite humility. Until you know that you and your active self are unreal, until you know that, you can't let go of yourself. You can't surrender yourself. As long as you believe in your existence separate and apart from God, you can't experience union, because you won't be willing to surrender. You won't be willing to let go of that identity in order to enjoy the depth of that merge, of that love. So one should be careful about anger, passion, and greed. Take, for instance, the case of Hanuman. In a fit of anger, he burned Ceylon. At last he remembered that Sita was living in the Ashoka grove. Then he began to tremble lest the fire should injure her. Right? The neighbor, well, why has God created wicked people? Why create something and then say it's wrong? The master, that's his will, his play. In his Maya, there exists avidya as well as vidya. Darkness is needed too. It reveals all the more the glory of light. There is no doubt that anger, lust, and greed are evils. Why then has God created them? In order to create saints. A man becomes a saint by conquering the senses. Is there anything impossible for a man who has subdued his passions? He can even realize God through his grace. Again, see how his whole play of creation is perpetuated through lust. So you can't have light without dark, right? This creation, this experience of life, as fine-tuned and balanced as it is, it requires both. It requires suffering and it requires joy. It requires health and it requires sickness. You can't have one without the other. You wouldn't know you were happy if you had never been sad. You would not know that you were healthy if you had never been sick. And so it's a backdrop to its own self, is what he's saying. Wicked people are needed too. At one time, the tenants of an estate became unruly. The landlord had to send Golak Chuduri, who was a ruffian. He was such a harsh administrator that the tenants trembled at the very mention of his name. There is need of everything. Once Sita said to her husband, Rama, it would be grand if every house in Ayodhya were a mansion. Oh no, I hate this story. Sorry. He says, Sita said to her husband Rama, it would be grand if every house in Ayodhya were a mansion. I find many houses old and dilapidated. But my dear, said Rama, if all the houses were beautiful ones, what would the masons do? Laughter. God has created all kinds of things. He has created good trees and poisonous plants and weeds as well. Among the animals, there are good, bad, and all kinds of creatures, tigers, lions, snakes, and so on. Neighbor. So it's not the story I was thinking. I thought it was the leaky roof story. That Rama, that Sita in that story, since I mentioned not liking it, I'll share it. But that Sita in that story, she's like, Rama, why don't you open the coffers of the treasury and give everybody enough money for everything that they need, so we don't all have to work anymore? Why can't you do that? Wouldn't the world be a better place like that? And Rama said, okay, since you want it, I will grant it. And so he opens the treasury, and all the people in town have all the money that they need, and nobody's working anymore. And suddenly the palace roof develops a leak, and Sita runs to Rama. Rama, the roof is leaking. Yeah, I can't find anybody to fix it. And Rama says, well, you've given them everything they need. Nobody's going to come fix the roof. And so Sita says, oh, well, put it back the way it was then. And so he puts it back again and takes all the money back into the treasury. Anyway, I hate that story. So I'm like, Sita, get a ladder, climb up on your roof and fix it. Anyway, that's one of the things I'm sure that I'll get a slap on the hand for. So all the houses are old and dilapidated. But my dear, said Rama, if all the houses were beautiful ones, what would the masons do? God has created all kinds of things. He's created good trees and poisonous plants and weeds as well. Among animals, there are good, bad, and all kinds of creatures, tigers, lions, snakes, and so on. Neighbor, sir, is it ever possible to realize God while leading the life of a householder? Master, certainly. But as I just said now, one must live in holy company and pray unceasingly. All right, so immediately that brings up our Thursday night class, the way of the pilgrim, running around. What does it mean to pray unceasingly? And he learns that it means to have the constant, unbroken thought of your beloved, always understanding that you are surrounded in, through, and of the beloved. And the nature of everything about you and everything that you do is love, wisdom through existence. And so this is what it is to pray without ceasing, to become aware that every action of your body, every thought of your mind, right, is a prayer. And to become aware of that as a prayer is important. That's why we have to become aware of how we live and how we think. We have to watch our minds. We have to be always aware that we are the observer, so that we can see these things, so that we can understand what our prayer is, so that we can then get this single-mindedness that Vivekananda talks about, so that if we know what we're thinking, we know what we're doing it all in consciousness, then we can focus that prayer to the divine. And that prayer then will be answered in the affirmative. In this regard, I always like to say that God answers yes to every prayer, but that yes is answered in proportion to all of your prayers together. So if you're not aware of all the things you're asking for in a day by what you think and what you do, then you're not really aware of your prayers. And so if this moment is not one of contentment for you, then consider this moment is the sum total of all of your desires. If those desires are not making this moment beautiful for you, then you need to become aware of what you're praying for. You need to become aware of how you're living so that you can move out of this unfortunate situation and find bliss in the moment, find contentment in your being, find a fullness of your life, a satisfaction in being. Certainly, but I said just now, one must live in holy company and pray unceasingly. One should weep for God. When the impurities of the mind are thus washed away, one realizes God. The mind is like a needle covered with mud, and God is like a magnet. The needle cannot be united with the magnet unless it is free from mud. Tears wash away that mud, which is nothing but lust, anger, greed, and other evil tendencies, and the inclination to worldly enjoyments as well. As soon as the mud is washed away, the magnet attracts the needle, that is to say, man realizes God. Only the pure in heart see God. A fever patient has an excess of the watery element in his system. What can quinine do for him unless that is removed? Why shouldn't one realize God while one is living in the world? But as I said, one must live in holy company, pray to God, weeping for his grace, and now and then go into solitude. Unless the plants on the footpath are protected at first by fences, they are destroyed by cattle. The neighbor. Then householders too will have the vision of God, won't they? Master. Everybody will surely be liberated, but one should follow the instructions of the Guru. If one follows a devious path, one will suffer in trying to retrace one's step. It takes a long time to achieve liberation. A man may fail to obtain it in this life. Perhaps he will realize God only after many births. Sages like Janaka performed worldly duties. They performed them, bearing God in their minds, as a dancing girl dances, keeping jars or trays on her head. Haven't you seen how the women in the northwest India walk, talking and laughing while carrying water pitchers on their heads? Neighbor. You just referred to the instructions of the Guru. How shall we find him? Master. Anyone and everyone cannot be a guru. A huge timber floats on the water and can carry animals as well, but a piece of worthless wood sinks if a man sits on it and drowns him. Therefore, in every age, God incarnates himself as the Guru to teach humanity. Satchitananda alone is the Guru.
Yeah.
Any question? All right, I'm going to hit the mute all button. If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm getting little
I'm so
chirps.
sorry. I
No worries.
realized I wasn't muted.
No worries. So he says here a couple of beautiful things. One, that Satchitananda, your very nature is your guru, right? So why does he tell us that we need a guru if Satchitananda is the guru? Well, it's because of the noise in your head. You see, you can't hear your guru. You can't hear the guru. What you hear is ego. What you hear is your body and your mind. Yeah, that's who you're obeying. Your body says, "Oh, I'm hungry." You jump up to go feed it, and then your mind says, "No, I don't want that food. I want that food." And so immediately you turn around and quickly start to prepare the proper food that's desired by the mind to satisfy the body. You see, and so we're very accustomed to tuning our ears to the mind and body, but we're not at all accustomed to hearing that silence within which is the fullness of the divine, your nature, which manifests spontaneously in the moment, not as a sound, not as an instruction, but as an inspiration. And so it takes a certain amount of practice to get the mind quiet, to get to a place where you can touch your own repose within, where you can get that rest and that rejuvenation simply by retreating to your own inner shrine. And that beginning time is when we need our guru, someone outside the realm of our ego, someone who's telling us what practices to do, what books to read, what things, how to pray and how to do worship and how to chant and all of those things at the beginning. But it's important to have something outside of your own ego helping you train in spiritual life. Because if you just depend on your own self, oh, I like to do this kind of meditation and I like to sit this long and I like to this incense and I like that teaching. If you do that, then you just do the things you like, which is what your ego does anyway. So there's not much advancement that way, right? You have to have a teacher outside of the ground, outside the realm of your ego, to be able to obey. It's that obedience that's key. You know, Ramakrishna makes a very interesting point about this, as he says it's not even the quality of the guru that's important. He says even if your guru visits a grog shop, you know, hangs out at the bar, even if that's your guru, you must treat him like God, because it's that relationship, it's that submission to the guru that breaks down your ego, which is what the necessary thing is. It's that obedience to that guru that breaks your ego. When you do things you don't like to do, you don't want to do, or you humble yourself to go ask what you should do when you already think you know what you should do. So it's the dismantling of ego that is facilitated by the ego, by the guru, that's very important for us. And then when the mind reaches a certain place, then you don't need that external guru so much anymore, because you can hear the inner self. You can hear, you can learn from that silence, that space within the heart. Why shouldn't one realize God while living in the world? But as I said, one must live in holy company, pray to God, weeping for his grace, and now and then go into solitude. Unless the plants on the footpath are protected at first by fences, they are destroyed by cattle. I want to mention these fences too, because quite often fences become the ideal to those that don't know better. This idea of not being able to hang out with certain people, this idea of not being able to go to certain places, all these restrictions, those are true while you have a predilection for those those misbehaviors. When those people are able to influence you, when those people are able to get you to act in ways you might not have acted if you weren't with them. But as soon as you develop that inner strength, as soon as you develop that inner space, avoiding people and staying away from people that aren't like you, or that you don't like, or that aren't holy, or don't meet a certain standard, that's not the ideal. That's a practice at the beginning, but it's not the ideal. You look at Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Holy Mother. Look at the people they hung with. They were able to hang out with the Girish Ghosh. They were able to hang out with actresses and prostitutes. And even take them on as disciples. So that their love is for everyone, and our love is also for everyone. But in the beginning, when we're not strong enough to carry everyone, when we're one of those worthless pieces of wood that can hardly stay afloat ourselves, then at that time we need those fences. We need to pull away from situations and people who aren't helpful for us. All right, my finger must have slipped. The master, anyone and everyone cannot be a guru. A huge timber floats on the water and can carry animals as well, but a piece of worthless wood sinks if a man sits on it and drowns him. Therefore, in every age, God incarnates himself as the guru to teach humanity. Satchitananda alone is the guru. What is knowledge? And what is the nature of this ego? God alone is the doer, and none else. That is knowledge. I am not the doer. I am a mere instrument in his hand. Therefore I say, O Mother, thou art the operator and I am the machine. Thou art the indweller and I am the house. Thou art the driver and I am the carriage. I move as thou movest me. I do as thou makest me do. I speak as thou makest me speak. Not I, but thou, but thou. From Prankrishna's house, the master went to Colonel Vishwanath's, and from there to the lily cottage. So this is a great example of that needing of grokking something and not just knowing about something. You see, we can say, oh, God is the doer. Oh, Ma, you, not me, you, not me. It's very easy to say and very satisfying to say and to think that way. It's another thing to experience it, to actually see that you cannot move, to actually see that you really are just the witness to what's happening. When you come to understand that this is a real teaching, it's not just an idea for humility, it's the actual point. You are not the doer. God has made you as you are. You will play accordingly. That your life is mapped out this way. And that's why then when the neighbor says, oh, but then we're not responsible, it's like, okay, yeah, you can say you're not responsible, but you're still going to feel responsible because you don't grok it yet. You haven't seen it in yourself. You have not caught God moving you yet. You still think you're the one doing it. You still think you're the one responsible for it. All right. Chapter 3. Visit to Vidyasagar. Anybody have a comment or a question about that little bit that we just finished? No? Yes, very good. All right. Visit to Vidyasagar, August 5th, 1882. Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was born in the village of Birsing, not far from Karmarpur, Sri Ramakrishna's birthplace. He was known as a great scholar, educator, writer, and philanthropist, one of the creators of modern Bengali. He was also well versed in Sanskrit grammar and poetry. His generosity made his name a household word with his countrymen, most of his income being given in charity to widows, to orphans, indigent students, and other needy people. Nor was his compassion limited to human beings. He stopped drinking milk for years so that the calves should not be deprived of it, and he would not drive in a carriage for fear of causing discomfort to the horse. He was a man of indomitable spirit, which was showed when he gave up the lucrative position of principal at the Sanskrit College of Calcutta because of a disagreement with the authorities. His affection for his mother was especially deep. One day, in the absence of a ferry boat, he swam a raging river at the risk of his life to fulfill her wish that he should be present at his brother's wedding. His whole life was one of utter simplicity. The title Vidyasagar, meaning ocean of learning, was given to him in recognition of his vast erudition. All right, so he's a good guy. An amazing person, actually, listening to all of those things that he does, the majority of his money being given away in charity. How many of us could say that the majority of our money goes to charity, in living this life? Sri Ramakrishna had long wanted to visit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Learning from M that he was a teacher at Vidyasagar's school, the master asked, "Can you take me to Vidyasagar? I should like very much to see him." M told Ishwar Chandra of Sri Ramakrishna's wish, and the Pandit gladly agreed that M should bring the master some Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. He only asked M what kind of Paramahamsa the master was, saying, "Does he wear an ochre cloth?" M answered, "No, sir. He's an unusual person. He wears a red bordered cloth and polished slippers. He lives in a room in Rani Rasmani's temple garden. In his room there is a couch with a mattress and a mosquito net. He has no outer indication of holiness, but he doesn't know anything except God. Day and night he thinks of God alone." On the afternoon of August 5th, the master left Dakshineshwar in a hackney carriage, accompanied by Bhavana, M, and Hazra. Vidyasagar lived in Badurbagan in central Calcutta, about 6 miles from Dakshineshwar. On the way, Sri Ramakrishna talked with his companions, but as the carriage neared Vidyasagar's house, his mood suddenly changed. He was overpowered with a divine ecstasy. Not noticing this, M pointed out the garden house where Raja Ramohan Roy lived. The master was annoyed and said, I don't care about such things now. He was going into an ecstatic state. The carriage stopped in front of Vidyasagar's house. The master alighted, supported by M, who then led the way. In the courtyard there were many flowering plants. As the master walked to the house, he said to M like a child, pointing to his shirt button, "My shirt is unbuttoned. Will that offend Vidyasagar?" "Oh no," said M. "Don't be anxious about it. Nothing about you will be offensive. You don't have to button your shirt. He accepted the assurance simply like a child. Vidyasagar was about 62 years old, 16 or 17 years older than the master. He lived in a two-story house built in the English fashion, with lawns on all sides and surrounded by a high wall. After climbing the stairs to the second floor, Sri Ramakrishna and his devotees entered a room at the far end of which Vidyasagar was seated facing them, with a table in front of him. To the right of the table was a bench. Some friends of their host occupied chairs on the other two sides. Vidyasagar rose to receive the master. Sri Ramakrishna stood in front of the bench, with one hand resting on the table. He gazed at Vidyasagar, as if they had known each other before, and smiled in an ecstatic mood. In that mood he remained standing a few minutes. Now and then, to bring his mind back to normal consciousness, he said, "I shall have a drink of water." In the meantime, the young members of the household and a few friends and relatives of Vidyasagar had gathered around. Sri Ramakrishna, still in an ecstatic mood, sat on the bench. A young man, 17 or 18 years old, who had come to Vidyasagar to seek financial help for his education, was seated there. The master sat down a little distant from the boy, saying in an abstracted mood, "Mother, this boy is very much attached to the world. He belongs to your realm of ignorance." Vidyasagar told someone to bring water and asked M whether the master would like some sweetmeats also. Since M did not object, Vidyasagar himself went eagerly to the inner apartments and brought the sweets. They were placed before the master. Bhavanath and Hazra also received their share. When they were offered to M, Vidyasagar said, "Oh, he's like one of the family. We don't have to worry about him." Referring to a young devotee, the master said to Vidyasagar, "He's a nice young man and is sound at the core. He's like the river Falgu. The surface, it's covered with sand, but if you dig a little, you will find water flowing underneath." After taking some of the sweets, the master with a smile began to speak to Vidyasagar. Meanwhile, the room had become filled with people, and some were standing and others seated. Master: "Ah, today, at last, I have come to the ocean. Up till now, I have seen only canals and marshes or a river at the most, but today I am face to face with the Sagar, the ocean." Everyone laughs. Vidyasagar: "Then please take some salt water." Laughter. "Oh, no. Why salt water? You aren't the ocean of ignorance. You are the ocean of Vidya, knowledge. You are the ocean of condensed milk." Everyone laughs. Vidyasagar: "Well, you may put it that way." The Pandit became silent. Sri Ramakrishna said, "Your activities are inspired by sattva. Though they are rajasic, they are influenced by sattva. We've got sattva, rajas, and tamas, right? Rajas is activity. Someone who's rajasic can't sit still, always has things to do, places to go, people to see. And then you've got the tamasic, those who can't be bothered with anything. They'd rather just sit there in their chair and do nothing. That's their mode of operandi, nothingness, inertia. And then there's sattva. Sattva is the perfect balance. Sattva is a person who's in control of their senses, who's rajasic when rajasic is proper, who's tamasic when tamasic is proper, but is always well balanced. The Pandit became silent, and Sri Ramakrishna said, "Your activities are inspired by sattva. Though they are rajasic, they are influenced by sattva. Compassion springs from sattva. Though work for the good of others belongs to rajas, Yet this Rajas has Sattva for its basis and is not harmful. Sukha and other sages cherished compassion in their minds to give people religious instruction, to teach them about God. You are distributing food and learning. That is good too. If these activities are done in a selfless spirit, they lead to God. But most people work for fame or to acquire merit. Their activities are not selfless. Besides, you are already a siddha. Siddha means literally perfected, boiled, well cooked, as it were. So you see, this is the thing. When we help others, if we see ourselves as the doer, then we're going to become egotistical about it. Anytime we see ourselves as providing service to anything else, we assume that we have something to give. We assume that we are somehow above that which we are helping. Otherwise, we couldn't help them. And that's why Vivekananda in that work, Karma Yoga, teaches us, no, you are not helping anyone but yourself. That everyone is you. Everyone, God is in the blind man. God is in the poor man. God is in the person that you're serving. And if God wanted them different, he would make them different. It's not up to you to serve them to make them different or to help them to make them better. You worship God in that person through your compassion, through your kindness, through your generosity, through your love. You worship when you give. You do not help when you give. Who are you to help anyone? Vivekananda asks. So that's what it is to have a rajas that's motivated by sattva. You know, sattva is this balance. There's no idea of gaining anything through your service. There's no idea of changing anything through your service. Your service is a form of worship, and it's because you recognize God in everything, in everyone, and you take advantage of the opportunities to worship. And that's how we do it without accumulating karma, without becoming deluded. That's why he says most people work for fame or to acquire merit. Their activities are not selfless. Besides, you are already a siddha. You've already learned these things. Vidyasagar, how is that, sir? The master laughing. When potatoes and other vegetables are well cooked, they become soft and tender. And you possess such a tender nature. You are so compassionate. Laughter. Vidyasagar also laughing. But when the paste of the kalai pulse is boiled, it becomes all the harder. Master. But you don't belong to that class. Mere pundits are like diseased fruit that becomes hard and will not ripen at all. Such fruit has neither the freshness of green fruit nor the flavor of the ripe. Vultures soar very high in the sky, but their eyes are fixed on the rotten carrion on the ground. The book learned are reputed to be wise, but they are attached to woman and gold. Like the vultures, they are in search of carrion. They are attached to the world of ignorance. Compassion, love of God, and renunciation, these are the glories of true knowledge. This is something very important, you know. It's not what you know, it's who you are. You know? It's not that you can quote lots of scriptures, not that you can chant all of the different Sanskrit chants, not that you know all of these things and have read all of the books of the order. It has nothing to do with it. What are you? You know, is your life pure? You know, what does your private life look like? Is it filled with lust and greed? What does your private mind look like? Is it full of your own needs and your own dreams and your own goals and ideals? Or is it a mind of service? Are you looking for ways to be helpful? Are you looking for ways to serve? Looking for ways to care? It's very important, you know. One of the things that I've learned is, like, the books that I pick up to read, I always make sure I know about the author. I don't just pick up any religious book and just read it because it's a religious book or it's a popular book. I always want to know the character of the author. You know, if someone's writing a book about marriage and they've been divorced 3 or 4 times, what do they have to say about marriage? you know, like that. In the Christian world, to be an elder in the church, you have to have a faithful family. The relationships between you and your wife has to be good. Your children have to respect you and love you. There has to be the condition of your family is what dictates or shows what you are. And so you see, that's the question for you. It's not a matter of what we know. It's a matter of who we are and how we live. So compassion, love of God, and renunciation. These are the marks of good character. These are the glories of the true knowledge, not just a head knowledge, not just the relationships between verses and ideas, but the actuated living the life, obeying those things that you know, manifesting those things that you know. That's why that definition of truth, what is truth? Truth is the alignment of what you say, what you think, and what you do. That those three things have to be in alignment. If they are not in alignment, you are not a man or a woman of truth, right? You're deceitful. You have compromises that need to be dealt with. Vidyasagar listened to these words in silence. The others, too, gazed at the master and were attentive to every word he said. Vidyasagar was very reticent about giving religious instruction to others. He had studied Hindu philosophy. Once, when M had asked him his opinion of it, Vidyasagar had said, "I think the philosophers have failed to explain what was in their mind." But in his daily life, he followed all the rituals of Hindu religion and wore the sacred thread of a Brahmin. About God, he had once declared, "It is indeed impossible to know him. What then should be our duty? It seems to me that we should live in such a way that if others followed our example, this very earth would be heaven. Everyone should try to do good to the world." Sri Ramakrishna's conversation now turned to the knowledge of Brahman. Master, Brahman Brahman is beyond vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. It is beyond Maya, the illusion of duality. The world consists of the illusory duality of knowledge and ignorance. It contains knowledge and devotion, and also attachment to lust and greed, righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil. But Brahman is unattached to these. Good and evil apply to the jiva, the individual soul, as do righteousness and unrighteousness. But Brahman is not at all affected by them. One man may read the Bhagavata by the light of a lamp, and another may commit a forgery by that very light. But the lamp is unaffected. The sun sheds its light on the wicked as well as on the virtuous. You may ask, how then can one explain misery and sin and unhappiness? The answer is that these apply only to the jiva. Brahman is unaffected by them. There is poison in a snake, but though others may die if bitten by it, the snake itself is not affected by that poison. What Brahman is cannot be described. All things in the world, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Tantras, the 6 systems of philosophy, they have all been defiled like food that has been touched by the tongue, for they have been read or uttered by the tongue. Only one thing has not been defiled in this way, and that is Brahman. No one has ever been able to say what Brahman is. Vidyasagar to his friends, "Oh, that is a remarkable statement. I have learned something new today." Master, a man had 2 sons. The father sent them to a preceptor to learn the knowledge of Brahman. After 2 years, They returned from their preceptor's house, and they bowed low before their father. Wanting to measure the depth of their knowledge of Brahman, he first questioned the older of the two boys. "My child," he said, "you have studied all the scriptures. Now tell me, what is the nature of Brahman?" The boy began to explain Brahman by reciting various texts from the Vedas. The father did not say anything. Then he asked the younger son the same question, but the boy remained silent and stood with his eyes cast down. No word escaped his lips. The father was pleased and said to him, "My child, you have understood a little of Brahman. What it is cannot be expressed in words." What it is cannot be expressed in words. Men often think that they have understood Brahman fully. Once an ant went to the hill of sugar. One grain filled its stomach. Taking another grain in its mouth, it started homeward. On its way, it thought, "The next time I'll carry this whole home, I'll carry home the entire hill." That is the way shallow minds think. They don't know that Brahman is beyond one's words and thought. However great a man may be, how much can he know of Brahman? Sukadeva and sages like him may have been big ants, but even they could carry at the utmost 8 or 10 grains of sugar. So you see the idea of Brahman, it cannot be a matter of any limitation. It can't have any attribute, or it has all attributes. It can be either way. The Buddhists would say he has no attribute, is emptiness, void. The Vedanta says, oh, he's the potential of all attributes. He's full. Same thing. When there's one without a second, then no one's there to describe it. So all descriptions are appropriate, but no description is true, right? Because any attribute is a limitation. If you say that God is good, then he can't be bad. If you say if God is big, then he can't be small. You see, so nothing can be said about the divine. And that's our first clue, this path of Advaita, this path of Jnana. It's that idea of stepping out of your local mind, where all of the words and adjectives and attributes hang out. They're all there. But you come down below that mind, you silence that mind, and you sit in this silent space within, in the Om, as it were. And in there, God can be realized, not by the mind. He can't be disassembled and put into mind. But he can be known without being known, in that sense, not known in the relative sense, in the sense of facts and characteristics being set in boxes in the mind and related to one another. That's not how God can be known. God can be known by the direct experience of this moment, by being able to remove your mind from this moment, all of your history that interprets it, all of your future that projects it, coming down to the silence and fullness of this infinite potential that is this moment. God is experienced there, not in thinking about him, not in wondering about her, but in being in that presence, submitting, surrendering your ego, surrendering your personality, surrendering your wit, surrendering your education, surrendering everything that runs in the circles of your mind, letting go of all of that. God can be experienced. God can be seen. As for what has been said in the Vedas and the Puranas, do you know what it is like? Suppose a man has seen the ocean, and somebody asks him, well, what does the ocean look like? The first man opens his mouth as wide as he can and says, what a sight! What tremendous waves and sounds! The description of Brahman in the sacred text is like that. It is said in the Vedas that Brahman is of the nature of bliss. It is Satchitananda. Shuka and other sages stood on the shore of this ocean of Brahman and saw and touched the water. According to one school of thought, they never plunged into it. Those who do cannot come back to the world again. In Samadhi, one attains the knowledge of Brahman. One realizes Brahman. In that state, reasoning stops altogether, and man becomes mute. He has no power to describe the nature of Brahman. Once a salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean. Everybody laughs. It wanted to tell others how deep this water was, but this it could never do. For no sooner did it get into that water than it melted. Now, who was there to report the ocean's depth? A devotee. Well, suppose a man has obtained this knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi. Doesn't he speak anymore? Master. Shankaracharya retained the ego of knowledge in order to teach others. After the vision of Brahman, a man becomes silent. He reasons about it as long as he has not realized it. If you heat butter in a pan on the stove, well, it makes a sizzling sound as long as the water it contains has not dried up. But when no trace of water is left, the clarified butter makes no sound. If you put an uncooked cake of flour in that butter, it sizzles again. But after the cake is cooked, all sound stops. Just so, a man established in Samadhi comes down to the relative plane of consciousness in order to teach others, and then he talks about God. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. It becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey. But sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. An empty pitcher makes a gurgling sound when it's dipped in water, but when it fills up, it becomes silent. Everyone laughs. But if the water is poured from it into another pitcher, then you will hear the sound again. The rishis of old attained the knowledge of Brahman. One cannot have this as long as there is the slightest trace of worldliness. How hard the rishis labored. Early in the morning, they would go away from their hermitage and would spend the whole day in solitude, meditating on Brahman. At night, they would return to the hermitage and eat a little fruit or roots. They kept their minds aloof from the objects of sight, hearing, touch, and other things of worldly nature. Only thus did they realize Brahman as their own inner consciousness. So you see this definition of worldliness. Wow, what an ideal. You know, it's not about what we're doing and whatnot. It's about seeing and indulging in the world of objects. You know, what is the world of objects? The things that our body tells us through its senses. You know, the things that our mind tells us through its machinations and comparisons and you've got comparisons and you've got, what's the other thing? Things that are alike and things that are different. There's a word for it. I'll get it someday. I'll tell you next week. So this notion, though, it's not indulging in mind. You see, your practice is not to indulge in mind. Your practice is to be open, to be a witness to everything in this moment, not just parts of it, not just the interesting things, not just the thing you're looking at. Be aware of the whole room at once. You know, don't grab or hold any particular at all. That is what it is to know the beloved, you know, because only then can you respond fully. Only then can you understand the situation and know things as they are and not as you think they are, right?
Were you thinking about compare and contrast, Maharaj?
Yes, contrast. That's the word. Thank you, Kamala. I was hoping someone would save me. Compare and contrast. Exactly. That's what the mind is up to all the time, right? The mind has two functions. It's to see differences, it categorizes, and then finds relationships. It seeks the difference to categorize, and once it's got the categories, then it starts putting in those lines of relationship, relativity between all of those things. And that's all this local mind is. It's just a collection of your memories, a collection of your attachments, and the relationships between them, right? The mind, the body views a unity. It views one without a second, but it doesn't have a sense that can take in one without a second. It has 5 senses. So it breaks this unity, it breaks this God, this divinity, into 5 separate, disparate pieces. Your mind brings them in and starts building associations, relationships between these 5 senses in a desperate effort to try and reconstruct one without a second in the mind. Can't be done. Can't happen. So we live in that partial world, that broken unity. And as long as we think that we're going to find it through our sense, through our body, through our mind, through our world of separate boxes, it's not going to happen. It happens by turning away from that, looking within to your very own nature, because this is where the divine manifests. This is where the unchanging comes into the world and is expressed through your body and through your mind, right? So God goes this direction, not this direction. This is a reflection. It's not the origin. The origin is consciousness within you. The light of consciousness is reflected on the mind, right? In pure mind, there's no particularity, no ownership, no ego, no me or mine, right? And so the unity can be perceived. But in that mind, impure mind that has a sense of me and mine, that particularity gives it a perspective. And that perspective, by necessity, will always be partial and wrong. It will never be complete. So only thus did they realize Brahman as their own inner consciousness, their own inner light that was reflecting on their mind that they thought to be the outside world. But in the Kali Yuga, man, being totally dependent on food for life, cannot altogether shake off the idea that he is the body, right? And this is the Kali Yuga that we live in. Of course, the Kali Yuga, these yugas are millions of years long, so it's kind of hard to know exactly where they begin and end. Holy Mother says that Ramakrishna's birth was the advent of the Satya Yuga, the Yuga of balance. And that's why all these terrible things are happening right now, as they kind of line up for that. But he says in this Kali Yuga, we're working for food, kids. We have to work all day for our house and for our clothing and for our food. There's no way that we can drop off this idea of being a body. We're stuck in it. He says, in this state of mind, it's not proper for him to say, I am he, right? That's why there's 2 paths that they talk about in general. There's neti, and then there's the positive path. That is God. I am God. That I am God. I am God. I am God. I am God. Because until we understand what I means, right? When I say I very much mean this guy in an orange shirt sitting here talking with his glasses on. That's what I mean. Well, that's a fool. I'm a fool. That's not the I of the self. That self is me, even when it's in a dream. In a dream when there is no guy in an orange shirt. When that dream character might be, who knows what it is, a mosquito. And my eye becomes a mosquito for the dream, Or you watch a movie and your eye becomes the characters in the movie. That's why you cry at their sadness. That's why you feel for them. This I can be anything. It is God, and in fact is everything, right? But your experience of it as a particular, when you define it, that is the sense of I am he. And so anytime you say that I am God, even though technically it's true, what you're meaning is not true, because you're associating God with the ego self. And you're going to think that God has a will, and you're going to think that God gets angry, and you're going to think that God gets jealous, and you're going to think that God reacts and that God has a plan and all of these things because you think of yourself as all of those. And so you project all of that on the divine. But God, in the absolute, is perfect. There's no movement in perfection. There's no will in perfection.
Kwame, can
There's
I
no,
ask a question?
yeah, yes, please.
You said, I am God is true. Could you explain that?
Yes. Well, when we understand what I is the Atman. It's that which is expressing the entire universe at this moment. So that if we understood our I to be that, then we could say something like, I am God, because it would have no particularity about it. It would have to be the I without ego. It's the I that all of us are using. Right now, if the whole world sang I at the same time, that would be still, it still would not be the sum total of God, but it would be closer than any one of us saying, right? Because it would be the same I that we're all referring to. When we know that, when our I does not become a reference to this particular, then we're understanding I. When we think that I is referencing a particular, we don't understand I. And as long as we think it references a particular, we cannot say I am God, right? Because those two things are incompatible. If we understood I, the pure I, to have no particularity about it, it's just the isness of being, then we could say I am God, but we wouldn't be talking about this body mind. You know,
So
it
could
wouldn't
you
be.
say, I am God, you are God?
What's that?
Would it be correct to say, I am God, you are God, you are God, you are God, you are God?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I mean, you could say that. It's better just to say God is.
God is. Okay.
God is, and just leave it at that. You know, you go on listing a long time. But what
What,
our practice is to say, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not that thought, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm not 58, I'm not any age, I've never been born, I'll never die. And by doing that, our ego backs in to mother, right? It backs in. By denying attachment to anything, it attains the universal, right? The non-particular. As it has denied everything, it becomes everything, right? Because the ego gets dissolved. Like the salt doll. That's what he's talking about with the salt doll. What makes the salt doll salty? It's ego. It's a particular. What dissolves that saltiness? It's egoism. So that it does what? It gets dispersed through the ocean as a whole. It's no longer a particular. It is now in the whole ocean. And so that's why he says, what salt doll is going to tell you how deep the ocean is? You know, can't do it because he has become one with the ocean. So these things all tying together. So he says, as long as you have the idea that you are a body, in this state of mind, it is not proper for him to say, I am he. When a man does all sorts of worldly things, he should not say, I am Brahman. Those who cannot give up attachment to worldly things and find no means to shake off the feeling of I should rather cherish the idea, I am God's servant, I am his devotee. One can also realize God by following the path of devotion. The Jnani, the knower, the path of knowledge, gives up his identification with worldly things, discriminating, not this, not this. Only then can he realize Brahman. It is like reaching the roof of a house by leaving the steps behind, one by one. But the Vijnani, who is more intimately acquainted with Brahman, realizes something more. He realizes that the steps are made of the same material as the roof, bricks, lime, and brick dust. That which is realized intuitively as Brahman through the eliminating process of not this, is then found to have become the universe and all of its living beings. The Vijnani sees that the reality which is nirguna, without attributes, is also saguna, with attributes, right? So he's saying there, God can be empty or God can be full. He can have no attributes, or he can be the potential of every attribute. So that's the realization. So we do neti, 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 neti. And when we finally understand, when we finally realize, we realize there is no neti. that everything is divine, everything is God, but no particular thing is God. Right? Okay. A man, oh my gosh, it's 8:11. I'm just going on and on and on here, which I would love to do. Yes.
We started seeing free will and the problem of evil, and about the guru, and what are we, and then seizing the moment. I could stay with the phrase you said about staying in one moment. If I could just keep one moment of this talk, just one, not even a tiny bit of it. It's too much. It's a lot. I wish I could understand just a little bit.
Yes. Brother, know that every single one of us is in the same position. That's why we worship, that's why God manifests as a Jesus or as a Buddha or as a Ramakrishna. He gives us a particular that we can hold on to. But what we realize as we approach Ramakrishna or a Jesus is that there's nothing to hold on to. They are a whole through which God is manifested. And so through knowing them, we become expansive. We become infinite. So that's why we talk about Jnana. We love Advaita. It's really cool. It's lots of fun. It's a very exciting thing. But at the end of the day, we're bhaktas. We're devotionals. We worship God. We talk to God. We pray to God. And he's saying that in this time of the Kali Yuga, this day and age, society doesn't support us enough to become Gyanis in that sense. The whole society is built around the idea of us as bodies. And so there's no way to let go of that particular. And that's all right. That's all right. What we do is we try to keep expanding our idea of self. At first it's like what Prabhupada told me. He says, at first you're your own man. As a teenager, it's just you and the world. That's you. And then you get married. And suddenly there's not just you. Now you have to grow your sense of self to include two people. You have to learn to compromise and to anticipate needs of the other, and to be able to work out a self, that includes both of you. And then you have a kid. That kid's screaming all night long and you can't get a good night's sleep. Now your sense of self has to include three people. So you expand that sense to self to three, and it just keeps growing. Those kids, you get more kids, those kids get wives, that begets grandchildren. Grandchildren have friends, the neighborhood becomes your friend, everybody comes to hang out and have Kool-Aid at your house, and you keep expanding your sense of self until at last you are everybody. So it's a practice, it's a practice. But the wonder of it all is that grace is the bottom line. That we'll make all of this effort, it will come to nothing, but at some point, Mother will take compassion and fill in what's missing, give you that vision that will expand your view without effort. She'll short circuit your karma. So yes, it's all right. Be what we are. Be the best we can be, and Mother will take care of the rest. So, all right.
Well, I just want to thank, who was it? That Jose?
Yes.
Because, I'm lost 75% of the time. And it's okay.
Yes.
25% is wonderful.
Yes, no, absolutely. These things are ideals. You know, they're perfections. We look at them and we marvel, and we let that marveling inspire us. And we keep trying the impossible until one day we realize it's impossible. And that moment that we realize that it's impossible, that we have nothing that is able to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, we lay down that ego defeated. That ego is beaten, it's dead. We lay down with the realization that we cannot do this. And finally, we are ready for infinite grace because finally we've become infinitely humble, right? So that's a way that it works. Even in that, mother will not be defined. You know, if you come and you say it's going to be this way, mother will go out and pick some random kid on the street and give him enlightenment just to show you. It will happen as it happens. She is bigger and able to escape any particular definition of what and how she is. And that's the fun of it. It is indeed a play. You know, it's not a machine. It's a play. And grace is at the heart of it because its nature is love. Its nature is wisdom. And we get to see it. Always. That's all we've ever seen. Yeah, that's all you've ever seen.